Hey there. I'm excited to announce this to you today. This is what you've been waiting for in your spiritual quest. This is something I've wanted to do for a long time, and I'm finally ready to announce it that it's ready to go. It's the Grief to Growth Community Circle. Now, this is a sanctuary where like-minded souls are united in their journey through grief and towards personal transformation. It's more than just a place. It's a beginning. It's a commitment to growth and understanding. Here you're finding not just a community, but you're entering a circle of trust and depth. You're going to engage with interactive coursework. You'll dive into exclusive podcast episodes and partake in discussions that illuminate the path from mourning to empowerment. This is a realm where every question is honored and every individual's journey is validated. To be part of this exclusive circle, visit us at grieftogrowth.com/community or look for the chat icon at the bottom of every page on the main website. Remember that entry is a privilege because I want to ensure that every member is as dedicated and genuine as you are. You must apply to join, but the journey within is worth every step. So go ahead and join us today. Check it out, grieftogrowth.com/community, and I look forward to seeing you there.
Hi there. Welcome to Grief to Growth Podcast. Your host is Brian Smith, spiritual seeker, best-selling author, grief survivor, and life coach. Brian believes that the worst tragedies of life provide the greatest opportunity for growth. Brian says he was planted, not buried, and he is here to help you grow where you've been planted by the difficulties in life. In each episode, Brian and his guests will share what has helped them to survive and thrive. It is his sincere hope this episode helps you today.
Hey, everybody. This is Brian back with another episode of Grief to Growth. And today I've got with me Z Walters, and we're going to talk about Z's journey to where she is today. She is a history teacher at Chaffey College, and Z's mother died after a 7-year battle with breast cancer. And Z got involved with a project called Speaking Grief in the past year. And she's been talking about her experience with grief and specifically how her grief manifested physically and how Z turned to weightlifting to overcome that. So Z is a teacher at Chaffey College, and we're going to talk about her journey. So I want to welcome Z to Grief to Growth.
Hi, Brian. Thank you. And thank you for having me on your show. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great to meet you and to get to know more about your story. We all go through grief differently. It all hits us all differently. We all deal with it differently. And it sounds like you found quite an, I don't want to say unusual, but an interesting way of approaching dealing with the grief. But first, tell me about your mother and tell me what happened with your mother.
Right. So my mom was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. It was pretty much my first semester of grad school, actually. So I was in my kind of mid-20s, and I was now, working full-time. I just started a full-time grad program, and now caretaking on top of that. And we were, and we're a small family. It was, just me, my sister, my dad, my mom, and my husband in this country. My mom's family is still all in England. So it was, it became kind of the major focus of my life at that time. And we were fortunate that, my dad is a doctor and was able to get her really good treatment, and she had a really good quality of life for as long as possible. Mm-hmm. Her thing was always, she didn't want to be bedridden. She didn't want to not be able to do things. And honestly, that kind of last few months of her life where she did ended up, not fully bedridden, but it was getting there. And I think she was just, ready to say goodbye at that point. So, yeah. But yeah, I think just to kind of, my whole life from when we heard her diagnosis was really about, making all of my decisions based around that so that I would, make the most of the time I had with her, and that I would have as few regrets as possible. So really everything that I did was okay, if I don't go over to mom's house today, will I regret it later? If I don't
Yeah.
bring her dinner today, will I regret it later? If I don't call her right now, will I regret it later? And so every decision I made had that part to it.
Yeah. It just becomes all consuming when someone's going through like that, something like
Yeah.
that. Yeah. So, your mother, it sounds like she was fairly comfortable up until the end. And were you able to be with her when she transitioned, or?
Yeah, we were in the hospital. She was having a procedure to drain some of the fluid from the lungs, and she had a do not resuscitate.
Mhm.
Honestly, it happened in December, and she always seemed to get a little worse in the fall, winter periods, and then she seemed to be a little bit better in the spring and summer months.
Mhm.
And so she'd been admitted into the hospital. And honestly, like, we knew it was bad, but we were really expecting her to come home. Like, my sister and I, we cleaned up her room, put flowers in it at home, because we knew that she was going to, probably not be able to leave her room very much. So we decorated her room really nice, got her some new books, did it all nice. And we were really expecting, okay, it's a bad turn, but she'll be home in a few days.
Yeah.
And, my dad, we'd kind of been staying there alternatively, and we'd gone home, that evening. My dad stayed at the hospital with us. And then we got the phone call first thing in the morning, come now. And, I think my mom was just kind of, that day was just waiting for us to show up at the
Mhm.
hospital.
Okay.
And they did the procedure. We were just right outside the door. Actually, they had a curtain, and we were just standing right outside, and she didn't make it.
Yeah. I'm sorry. So, obviously, losing a loved one, someone as close as your mother, and you were a caretaker and everything, this hit you really hard. So, what was the grief like in those early stages?
It was kind of a weird experience, because being Muslim, the burial has to be done immediately, as long as that's possible. If there's no reason to do an autopsy or anything like that, you have to have the burial immediately, and then you do a memorial service 40 days later. And my mom just wanted a quiet, family only burial that way, and then to have the big memorial service that way her family could come for the memorial service.
Mm-hmm.
So it was pretty, right after, there was all kinds of things that we had to do to get everything organized. And then even with that kind of 40 days, there was a lot of, okay, we got to get, the imam to come. We've got to, figure out who's talking, order the food, and so it was with everything going on, and I was still in grad school, and I actually filled out some grant applications and, did some other stuff. And I was like, oh, I can continue going on. Like, I don't need to take a leave of absence. Like, this is, and then it was really kind of after the memorial service when things kind of started to die down. And then by that time, not as many people, everybody sent the flowers, they've sent the cards, they've called. And so then it's just kind of quiet. And that, I feel like, is when it really hit. It was just like, oh, like I really can't do anything now.
Yeah, that's a very common experience. I think that those first few days, weeks, we're in do mode, right? So we have to kind of shut down our emotions, and we're busy doing, and people are coming and going. So we don't really have time to go within. And then it's that 6 weeks or so afterwards that when we find ourselves alone and we start reflecting on what we're feeling.
Yeah. It's, I think there was a lot of, mental distractions.
Mm-hmm, right.
And then all of a sudden they weren't there. The people weren't there. And so all you have is time to think.
Yeah.
And
So how did that feel for you? I know you said that you were unable to speak your grief, I guess, at first.
yeah, it was really hard. And it wasn't like a denial type of situation where I was in denial that anything had happened. It was so emotional that I didn't know how to put it into words, and I didn't know how to really describe anything. And I'm not normally a very emotional person anyway. So I think that kind of sort of added to it. I did, definitely on the caretaking side, my sister did a lot of the, more emotional type of work with my mom. I did more of the like, okay, you need grocery shopping, you need, I'll cook you dinner, I'll do, So we kind of divided the caretaking stuff along those lines, what worked to our strengths.
Right.
And I had a really hard time like describing anything. And so it was really all kept internal. And I think I was, just kind of reading articles on the internet. I came across a Huffington Post article by Megan from Refuge and Grief. And it kind of down at the bottom, it said she had a free like half-hour phone consultation. And I was like, well, why not? I'll give it a try. And I really enjoyed talking with her, and she was really good about just letting the silence be, and just letting me say whatever it came up. And she was starting this writing course, the Write Your Grief course. And so I said, okay, I'll maybe writing will help. And I took the course a few times, and it did help me kind of put some word, even though I couldn't verbalize them, it did help me express some of the things. And, each time I went through it, I kind of, new emotions or new things kind of came up for me. So that was kind of a good starting point for me to start somewhat processing.
So start expressing some of it and getting it out. Yeah. So, but you mentioned that you were unable to really speak your grief, and it started to manifest physically. So how did that happen?
Yeah. And I think a lot of it was, even though I could write stuff, I still felt, and I did like start a little bit on, posting a few things on social media, but that was, also very kind of anxiety ridden for me. I wasn't used to, kind of putting myself out there for that. But I was still having a hard time, kind of communicating. And there was a lot of anger as well.
Really?
And, I was kind of keeping that. And it would be, stuff that when I even knew then that it would be irrational, like I'd get, super angry. It was Mother's Day, and you get emails of, from various, corporations like, oh, buy mom flowers, or buy mom this, or make reservations. And, I'm unsubscribing, and I'm sitting there, oh, some of us don't have moms. Like, this is very inappropriate emails to send.
Yeah. But that anger is it's very natural that when we go through that. And when, as you were saying, that it reminded me of someone that I knew a while ago, that on Mother's Day, she didn't have a mother, and she would get angry at everybody that did. So I think that's a common thing. And when we're going through grief, we don't realize it because we know it's not rational, but we still have it.
Right. Exactly. So it was kind of this thing where it's like, I don't want to talk about it to people, because I'm like, okay, well, this, I mean, I know that it sounds irrational. I know that it sounds crazy. And,
right.
Being fairly young, I didn't have friends that had lost parents, or were, most of them hadn't even lost grandparents.
Yeah.
So, I realized like, well, I can't say this to people because it's insensitive. And so I kept a lot of that in, and, keeping all of that in, and it just kind of, built up. And since I wasn't processing it, and I was having a hard time even processing it mentally, because people would say things like, or I'd read articles, go for walks, do yoga, all of this. And the problem with that for me is going on walks meant that my brain was free to think. And doing yoga meant that my brain was free to think. So all of these activities that people were recommending, I was like, well, but then my brain is free to just kind of obsess over things. And
Yeah.
so there were two things that would really happen. One is that anger, and I would obsess over the anger over, and I'd rethink things and create scenarios in my head, and build things up to be
Mhm.
bigger than they were. And and it would build that anger, and I would kind of feed off of it. And I knew that this was not a healthy thing to do. I just couldn't stop myself
Sure.
from doing it. And I think, that brought a lot of, you're holding all that tension, that anger in your body. And then the other thing that happened for a little over a year after my mom died was that I would see her in the hospital bed dead. So like when my brain wasn't distracted, I'd get that visual
Yeah.
image again. So
Yeah.
then it was hard to sleep because now my brain is, relaxed, and it's like, okay. And
Yeah.
those images would come in. Same, I did do a little bit of walking, but I'd always listen to like audiobooks, and there was always something like I had to have the TV on, or I had to have an audiobook on, just to kind of keep my brain from thinking
Yeah.
too
From
much.
going back to the trauma. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's just something that happens to a lot of people as well. We kind of get stuck in a loop, and our brain wants to go back to that worst moment in time and just
Hmm.
relive it over and over again.
Yeah. And change the scenario slightly. And so, so everything I was, reading about this kind of self-care, what to do, it
Mhm.
was all things that were more peaceful, and but the problem is that just wasn't working
Yeah.
for me.
I
And
think that's a really, really good point, because I encourage people to try to get exercise. And for me, I like walking, and some people like yoga and stuff, but for some people it's like you said, that leaves your brain too free. So we all have to find what works for us. But before we get to what was working for you, so you mentioned it was manifesting with you physically. How was it physically manifesting with you?
I was getting, so I mean, I think some of it is pretty, traditional with stress. You get a lot of it, kind of your neck and back areas.
Hmm.
And then I was getting a lot of really bad migraines, and they were the kind of migraines that you almost feel like that there's like shooting pain um, into your temple or into your eyes, and then I could just feel it kind of traveling, down my back. And I did actually, I went to the doctor, and I was like, I'm pretty sure this is grief related.
Hmm.
But let's just maybe run some tests and make sure there's not something actually wrong. Because I was getting them every single day. And
Hmm.
then, I had, taking medication for it. And I was like, well, I don't want to be, taking medication every single day, but I was getting these migraines, and it was like, no matter what I did, changing the lighting, doing less computer work, or, any of these things, it just wasn't, solving that problem there. And it was just, my whole body started to just ache.
Hmm.
And, and yeah, and I had read kind of an article about back then about holding grief in your hips, and how, because I was feeling it, not just in the back area, but
Hmm.
my hips were achy. And I saw this article, and I can't remember exactly where the article was, but I remember reading that and I'm like, oh yeah, like that, maybe that's part of it.
Yeah, it's interesting how grief manifests so differently for different people, and for some people it's they eat too much, or they eat too little, or they sleep too much, or they sleep too little, or and so it's really hard when you're going through it to figure out, like, what's going on with me, what's really wrong with me, and especially when the physical things start to happen, because a
Yeah.
lot of times we don't think of that mind body connection. That when our mind is not right, it can actually manifest through our body, which is what you were experiencing.
Yeah, and it was the same. I'm definitely an emotional eater. So I definitely ate a lot, and gained quite a bit of weight. But it was one of the things that was interesting. It wasn't just emotional eating, but my mom died on a Thursday in the morning. And I found that Thursdays I couldn't do anything. I was eating like an entire bag of chips before noon. And it didn't actually dawn on me until months later. And I happened to mention it to somebody. I mean, I think it was like 6 months after my mom died. And I don't know, I can't remember quite the conversation that was happening, but the person asked and they were like, "What day did your mom die?" And I was like, "Oh, it was a Thursday."
Yeah.
And it was like my body knew, but my mind hadn't really figured it out. But my body knew that like I had had this trauma on a Thursday morning, and it was trying to like comfort me in a way.
Yeah.
And granted, not in the best way, but you know, but I hadn't put two and two together until somebody actually asked that. And so, and I was like, oh, I did. And, you know, not so much anymore, but every once in a while I kind of get that like feeling of dread, or, you know, I'm just like, oh, I really, you know, I need something, or, you know, I can't wake up in the morning, or I can't get going. And it'll still take me a bit while, and I'll be like, oh, it's a Thursday. And it's like, oh, I wonder if this is like, you know, I don't mentally feel like I wasn't mentally thinking about it, but
not consciously. Yeah. It's amazing how powerful the subconscious is. So how did you discover, you discovered weightlifting as something that was therapeutic for you? So how did you find that?
So I'd always done, you know, a lot of physical activity. And then after my mom died, I did, I think it was maybe a year later, I did get a gym membership, but I was just kind of, you know, just going through the motions, not really following, you know, a strict program or anything like that. And it was actually probably around this time, you know, her birthday was just last week. And so it was about this time of year. And I was finally like, you know what, I'm in so much pain that I need to do something about this. And I, you know, I think some of it was that I couldn't deal with everything emotionally or mentally, that my body just said, you're in pain. And you're not realizing how much pain you're in. So we're going to show you how much pain you're in. And so I went to the doctor, made sure that there wasn't anything, you know, major going on. And then I was like, okay, well, I started, you know, I did some like therapeutic massages to kind of help with the tension and the knots and everything. I did some acupuncture to help with that. And, you know, my doctor, he was like, yeah, you've gained weight, but you know, it's not anything serious, but maybe it would help you to just get a little bit more exercise. So I signed up with, a trainer at the gym. They were doing this, you know, New Year, you know, 12-week, program thing. So I figured, okay, you know, that'll give me a goal and something to work for. And again, I wasn't really concerned about losing weight. It was more about just feeling a little bit better. And I found that the weight, like one, I really loved it. And two, it, you know, I think some of it was because it was so strenuous. And then there's also a lot of the counting that goes, you know, that it distracted my brain in a way that like the yoga or the walking didn't. And so it did take a while, but you know, after a month or so, I was actually like, oh, I am actually feeling better after, like, I'm actually feeling a little happier, and I'm feeling a little bit more alert. And it was, you know, it was like, well, I want this to continue. And, you know, and I did kind of recognize like, oh, this is an exercise that my brain is focused on my actual body, and it's not, you know, traveling elsewhere. It's not thinking about my mom. So now I've got this 1 hour where all of those things that were causing, you know, a lot of grief and pain and reliving all of those situations, it's gone for an hour. And I can focus on something else. And so I think that was, you know, and it kind of goes back to, you really have to find what works for you, because nothing that I had read, nobody that I talked to had ever said, oh, try weightlifting. It was always like cardio or yoga or meditation or walking.
Yeah.
And none of that was working.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Grief is unique and everybody is different. And so when we recommend, for example, meditation to some people, they're like, well, I can't meditate because as soon as I close my eyes, I go right back to the trauma.
yeah.
So for you, it apparently was a distraction. There's also some good things that happen to our body when we lift weights in terms of releasing endorphins and stuff like that.
Exactly. And I think, it did kind of move into where I could actually do proper self-care because, as I was kind of feeling better and feeling healthier, moving, actually getting some exercise. And then, before I was doing a lot of emotional eating and, I was definitely taking, well, this is self-care. Like, this is how I process. But the problem is that I wasn't kind of intentionally doing it.
Right.
Whereas now I can be like, well, yeah, I'm, it's my mom's birthday. I know, like, I'm going to have a lot of grief. And you know what? I'm going to make myself this nice meal, or I'm going to get some cookies, or I'm going to order a pizza and I'm going to sit down and I'm going to think about my mom. And so now I feel like I'm still using food, but I'm using it in more of an intentional way.
Yeah.
And so it really now is a self-care habit instead of before where I was just mindlessly eating and telling myself afterwards, well, this is self-care. This is how you're going to feel better. This is what makes you feel better. This is what you need right now. And there wasn't a whole lot of that intention. So then it wasn't doing what I was telling myself that it was going to do.
That's a great observation. And if you eat like that all the time, it also makes you feel terrible.
Yeah, it does.
So we like to do that every once in a while, but we don't want to be doing that every day.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that was, and now I do kind of plan things out. I'm like, okay, I'm going to do a really good it's my mom's birthday. I do a really good workout in the morning, and then I can relax in the evening, and have whatever it is that's going to make me feel good. And then there's not that guilt that comes later where you beat yourself up for it. Like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Or, oh, that didn't actually make me feel good. And, because before I was kind of getting into that spiral, oh, this didn't make me feel good. Now I'm having another bad day. So now I'm going to, do the same thing and hope for something, hope for a different result. Oh, that didn't work. Well, I'll try it again. And, and then a week goes by and you're just like, well, now I've just done these really destructive habits for an entire week. And
that's a good point, because it's easy to get on a kind of a downward spiral, right? If we're not getting any exercise, it actually makes us feel more sluggish, and then we don't feel like exercising, and then we're eating the improper foods, so we start gaining weight, and you have to do something to break that cycle, which for you is weightlifting.
Yeah.
So in terms of your weightlifting, I get the feeling this is more than just going to the gym a couple times a week and lifting a little bit of weight.
So I actually, so I did the kind of 12-week program, and then I was just like, well, let's continue. Let's see what else what can I do with this? And, so I still have the same trainer. I did some powerlifting for a while, and got, pretty intense with that. And, right now, I train, about heavy weightlifting about 4 times a week, with COVID and everything, and being here in California, set up a home gym in my garage. But yeah, so, I do pretty heavy training 4 times a week. And I'm kind of put a goal out there, maybe do a bodybuilding competition, sometime next year when hopefully things are opening up a little bit more. So it's kind of I'd kind of avoided it for a lot of people. Kept saying, oh, you should do a competition. And I was like, no. And I'm like, well, you know what, maybe I will. So, so that's kind of my goal right now.
So you started weightlifting. When did you start weightlifting, actually?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey there, something I want to tell you about today. My podcast platform, Buzzsprout, has recently made it easier for me to allow you to support me financially. go to www.grieftogrowth.com/subscribe. That's grief, the number 2, growth.com/subscribe. And once you're there, you can sign up to support me financially. Now, you can do it for as little as $3 a month, or of course, as much as you'd like. If you do that, you'll get access to bonus episodes, and you'll see those in the regular feed. They'll have a lock on them. But when you become a subscriber, you'll actually get access to your own private feed, and you'll be able to listen to the regular podcast along with the bonus podcast for the subscribers. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for sharing the podcast. And I want to thank those of you who support me financially. Have a great day, and on to the episode.
So I'd done a little bit before, but I think it was 2017 is when I got really 2000. I think maybe the end of 2016, 2017 is when I got really into it. So it did take, a couple years after my mom died to really reach that point where I was like, okay, and I'd kind of been trying things and just kind of been like, okay, see what sticks, I actually found also that knitting helped. And again, I think it was the counting. You have to count the stitches and whatnot. Yeah. So it kind of, once I got the hang of knitting and I wasn't, screaming at the yarn and, breaking the needles and stuff because they weren't doing what they were supposed to do. So there was a lot of anger and frustration in that, but I had read an article about knitting and grief and I was like, well, again, I'll try anything. So I
think you're making some really good points. We have to explore different things. So knitting, someone might think, well, it's kind of the opposite of weightlifting, but it is something. It's something repetitive. It's something that we can concentrate on. It's something that can kind of take us out of that conscious thought, and it's kind of a meditative type of thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's a different form of meditation, but and I think the fact that you are also creating something was helpful. I mean, I'm not sure if my friends and family appreciated all the like lopsided scarves they got that year, but I think the fact that you can be like, oh, like I did something, like I'm grieving and I'm in this process, but I did something. And I think the weightlifting kind of had the same thing because, as you're building the weight and you're lifting more weight, it's like, oh, like I'm doing something, I'm improving, like I'm getting stronger, I can lift heavier weight. And so it's, one of those kind of like small milestones that you point to, like, hey, I got out of bed, I took a shower, I made my bed. I added 5 pounds to my squats. I, made Christmas gifts this year. So they're kind of little things that don't necessarily directly focus on the grief, but I think they kind of help you for when you're ready.
We'll get back to Grief to Growth in just a few seconds. Did you know that Brian is an author and a life coach? If you're grieving or know someone who is grieving, his book, Grief to Growth, is a best-selling, easy-to-read book that might help you or someone you know. People work with Brian as a life coach to break through barriers and live their best lives. You can find out more about Brian and what he offers at www.grieftogrowth.com, www.grief2growth.com, or text growth, GROWTH, to 31996. If you'd like to support this podcast, visit www.patreon.com/grieftogrowth, www.patreon.com/GRIEF2GROWTH to make a financial contribution. And now back to Grief to Growth.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it really was, is that by focusing on my physical body and making my physical body healthy, then I was like, okay, now I'm actually ready to really look at my grief and to really process my emotions. Like I can handle it now.
Yeah, you got your mind back to being in a place where you could be strong enough to handle it. And when I work with people, I talk about those early days, weeks, months, years. I call it like the white knuckle period. You're just holding on. You're just trying to survive moment to moment. get out of bed, function, stuff like that. And then eventually get to the point where we say, okay, now I want to start healing. I want to start feeling better. And that could be different times for different people. Some people it's 6 months, some people it's 4 years, some people frankly, it's never. Some people just kind of stay in that mode, but it sounds like you got to the point where you're like, I've got to find something that works for me.
Yeah. And I think, what you said is true, is that we kind of have to get to that point almost on our own. That if somebody had said that to me, 6 months after my mom died, I would have been like, yeah, no, like, you don't understand. You don't know what I'm going through. You can't tell me what's going to help me. You don't know. And I would have been very defensive. And so it really did take getting to the point where I was like, I am in so much pain that, I can't sleep. I'm taking medication every day. I can barely physically function. I have to do something. And it was almost, I had gotten to the point where it was like, yeah, like I just can't live like this anymore. And that's what, really kind of drove me to find something.
Yeah. So how did you get involved with the Speaking of Grief project?
Right. So it was kind of through when I was doing the writing course through Refuge in Grief. And I think it was about maybe a year or two after, Megan was looking for someone to help her with the course, some of the administrative stuff. And I was like, you know what, this course did really help me kind of, even if I couldn't verbalize it, it helped me put some of my thoughts on paper. And so I really wanted to kind of help and give back in even a small way. So I started helping with the monthly writing course, just kind of helping people get situated, grief brain. When, you're in the midst of it, you can be, oh wait, I've signed up for this course. How do I log in? How do I, and just kind of, helping people get through that. And she actually, when the documentary came up, she actually recommended me to the directors, and it was very, I agreed to do it, and it was very nerve-wracking because I don't normally I'm good kind of talking one-on-one and, personal, but kind of putting myself out there, like, social media and, on videos, now on a podcast. This has definitely been kind of a challenge, and moving myself out of my comfort zone there. But I think it was also really good. And I absolutely loved, the whole idea behind the Speaking Grief documentary, and the fact that they really built it up to be, it's not just a documentary. We're going to provide resources for people. We're going to, put out a lot of material that people can use. And doing that, I think and then as I kind of shared a lot of this on social media, I started hearing from people. And I mean, I keep my stuff pretty private, but just from like my own social circle, I started hearing from people, thanks for sharing this, or thanks for putting this out. Like, I'm sharing it with my friends, or I'm sharing it with somebody I know who's grieving, or, as time went on, I actually started to know more people who have lost loved ones. Yeah. And I didn't know, they'd never talked about it. And so when I I started sharing a lot of the Speaking Grief, the clips, or their social media and whatnot, I started hearing from people, acquaintances, I lost my dad or my brother, and, thank you for sharing this. And I was like, I had no idea. I had no idea that you were going through any of that. So I think that has really been kind of an eye opener for me on like how much people are going through that we don't share. And we don't know.
That's a really good point that you made. We don't know what other people are going through. And until we take the initiative and give them permission to speak their grief, people just hold it inside. And as you realize, that doesn't work. The grief is going to manifest one way or the other. It's going to come through you. and we can try to hold on to it, but it's really grief is something that has to be processed. We've got to go through it. So it's great to see resources, and we should probably tell people that may not know the Speaking Grief is a documentary, but it's also a list of resources, and you can find it at speakinggrief.org. And it's great to see this coming out where people are able to start talking about this, because in our society it's very hidden, and it's almost something that people seem to be ashamed of.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hi there. I'm really excited to tell you about my latest ebook. It's 4 lessons that you can learn from the near-death experience without going through all the trouble of dying to learn them. I've been studying NDEs for several years now. I am completely convinced that not only are they 100% real, but that there's some very universal wisdom that we can get from the near-death experience. And I've distilled that down in this book into 4 short lessons. And I've also given you all the reasons why I believe that NDEs are absolutely real. So go to www.grieftogrowth.com/NDE lessons to pick it up for free. www.growth.com/NDE lessons. I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah. And I think, the film did a really good job of showing grief in a number of different aspects, how it impacts different people, different relationships. And, that is one thing, when I sent it to people, they were just like, oh, we love that it touches on all of these aspects. And I was really proud of the way that they put it together. It was kind of hard. And I know when it first came out, they sent me the link to watch it, and I was kind of like, oh, I don't know. Like, I was really kind of nervous, and I'm friends with a few people that had also participated in it, and they started sending me messages. Oh, it's really good. Like, and your part's really good. And I was like, oh, really? And they're like, you haven't watched it? I was like, no, not yet. So it was kind of one of those situations where, I'm sort of like hiding under a blanket on the sofa watching it. But I was really, I was really happy with how they did it, and all the, all the different types of grief and emotions and feelings, and how people deal with it and process with it. And I think, a lot of the material that they have on, on the website and everything is really good too. How to talk to people, or, how to be a good friend, because sometimes, a lot of people say, oh, well, I didn't contact you because I didn't know what to say. And honestly, like, I had some friends that they would literally do that. I don't, text me, I don't know what to say. I'm just here. And that was honestly the best thing. It's just like, you don't need to say anything. Just say that you don't know what to say. Like, that's okay. Cause most of us don't know what to say. So.
Yeah. Even after going through, what I've gone through and working with the people that I work with, there is no magic bullet. There's no one thing to say. I was talking to a mother a couple of nights ago, and her brother-in-law had just lost his son, and she was asking a group of us, so what things can I do to help him, like right now? What things can I do to kind of fix him, like right now? And we're like, there are no magic bullets. It's at that early stage. I mean, as you said, we kind of have to get to a point on our own when we're ready to start taking those steps out of it. And up until that time, it's just kind of hanging on.
Yeah. Yeah. And, everybody is different. Like, what works for one person, you could say something to one friend and it's great. You say it to another friend and they're going to, go crazy over it. Yeah. So, it's just really about, I think also just being, compassionate and realizing like, hey, like this worked for this friend, but it didn't work for this friend. And hey, I'm really sorry I said that. And just kind of accepting that, like, they're not really mad at you per se. It's just, you triggered them in a way, and it's gonna, and again, it's one of those things that I feel like when I was, right in the middle of my grief, it was one of those things like, okay, I know they don't mean it, but I'm just really mad. Yeah. And whereas now that I'm a few years out of that, I'm a lot more understanding of that. But, yeah, when somebody, when somebody would be like, oh, well, they don't really mean it that way. I'd be like, well, they said it. And, I wasn't ready to hear.
Yeah, well, that's another really great point that you brought up. There's these things that can trigger us, and I've been talking to people, and they'll say that I can't believe this person said this to me, and they're so upset, and I understand that, but I'm like, well, but they mean the best, when people are saying these things, they mean the best, but sometimes it just triggers us.
Yeah, yeah, and people's triggers are different, and sometimes you don't even know your triggers,
Right.
like. I didn't, there was a lot of things where I was just like, oh, wow, like I am really angry over this. And it was a complete surprise like that. There were some things that I could be like, oh yeah, like something like this would definitely make me angry. But yeah, there would be some things that I would just completely collapse over. And I was like, oh, that came out of nowhere. I was not expecting that. And, I think that even now that still happens, where, everything's fine. And then all of a sudden, like somebody pulls out like a photo album and, there's a picture of my mom. And I'm just like, oh, I was not prepared for that right now. And for some reason it just hits hard, but if it had happened a week later, it might not have hit that hard. And it would be like, oh, yay, there's a picture of my mom. That's like so awesome. But, it just kind of depends on what's going on that day or that week. And, something can be a trigger one week that's not a trigger the next week. And so, I think it's really hard, and it's hard for people to, who maybe haven't gone through grief, or that have gone through it, what works for them, and then not realize that, hey, this doesn't work for everyone. So I think, the more we talk about it, the more we can have compassion for different people's paths, different people's ways of coping.
Yeah. So it sounds like you say in the film, the documentary, they do talk about how people do different approaches, which I think is a wonderful thing, because as we said, everybody's different, and actually every grief circumstance is different. When your mother passes, you have a different relationship with her than you would have with a spouse or a child or a grandmother or a friend. So we sometimes go through these different grief things, and we're like, well, this is really different than when the other person passed away, but it's a different relationship. It's all unique.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, I think the more that we talk about that, the more we can just, have empathy for people and to just really be understanding. And I think, the more we can do that, it'll, hopefully help people, move with their grief and not kind of remain really stuck in that first emotions, first experiences of it. Because I know, in that first year, I definitely felt like, oh, I'm going to be like this forever. Like this is, and it's so strong, and this is my grief. And, and it was almost like, like nobody can take this away from me. Like my mom's gone, but I have this grief, and, but definitely looking back, you're just like, well, yeah, I don't want to stay in that place forever. But it is hard to kind of, I think, move forward, because sometimes, that's what you have, and you don't have your person anymore, but you have this grief. So you really want to hold on to that, because that's what you can hold on to.
That's another really important point. And I know I went through that when my daughter passed. You feel like you just said it perfectly. I don't have this person anymore, but I have my grief. So people hold on to the grief like it's a comfort blanket. It's like something we hold on to, and we wrap ourselves up in it. And we say, I'm going to feel this way for the rest of my life because I really love this person. Therefore, I need to feel this way, because otherwise I'm kind of letting them go.
Yeah.
And that's an early phase that we go through, but it's not necessarily true. It doesn't have to be true. And you figured out it wasn't. So how would you compare yourself now, 7 years later, the person that you are to the person that you were before your mother transitioned?
I would say, in some aspects, I feel like I've kind of gotten back to being me in a sense, because, definitely sort of during the years when she was sick, I did put some stuff on hold. And then a lot of, even if I wasn't putting it on hold, it was always framed within the context of her illness. And, after she passed, there was definitely that kind of holding on. I don't want to change anything in my life because, as soon as I start changing, now I've got a life that she wouldn't recognize. So, that was kind of another hard thing to kind of, to go through, is like, oh, I'm making changes and I'm moving forward, and I'm doing things. I'm doing powerlifting. And that was something that I never did before. So my mom wouldn't even be aware. Like, this wasn't something that I had done previously that I was like, oh, I'm going back to it. This is like something completely new. And it's like, oh, now I've got this new thing in my life that she has no idea that was going to be important to me. So that was really hard. But I would say that I think last year was really the first year where I was like, you know what? I'm feeling good about myself. I'm excited about life. I'm excited about doing new things. There wasn't as much, there was still sadness, but I felt like the excitement about doing new things in my life was greater than the sadness of the fact that my mom wasn't there to see it. Yeah. So it's still there. It's just the balance is different. And, so yeah, I think, last year was the first time that I really felt that. And I really felt, excited to try new things and excited to do new things and, to really kind of put myself out there in ways that I hadn't before. And, this year has definitely been a little different, with COVID and everything.
Different for everyone. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I was kind of surprised last week on, how hard her birthday was for me.
Sure.
And I was kind of like, well, and it was weird because I'm like, I don't know why exactly it was so hard. Is it because, everything in the world right now is kind of crazy and stress inducing, so it just amplifies the emotion? Or if it's the fact that, I have been talking a lot more openly about my grief through the Speaking Grief documentary. I had scheduled this podcast with you, so I knew that this was coming up, and I'd been posting a lot more on social media about it, and definitely promoting a lot of these things on social media. And I was like, is that why it feels, stronger? But I did, her birthday was on Friday, and again, it happened on Thursday. I'm sitting there, and it's, kind of early in the morning, and, I'm munching on like potato chips, and I'm like, I don't feel good. And then, halfway through the day, I'm just like, it's Thursday.
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, that makes sense.
Yeah. Recognizing it. That's great.
Yeah.
So, I know you've taken up something else too. You've taken up aerial dance, and you're working on a piece with that.
Yes. So my sister actually owns a circus performing arts studio, the Stage Global, in kind of close by us in Pomona, California. And she was fortunate enough, she went virtual when all of this happened. So she was able to keep her business going. And normally we do shows. And so this year, because we can't do live shows, we're doing a virtual show. And I did I took up the aerial rope. So I've been learning to do that. And this year, the show that we're doing, it's she's calling it Mementos, and it's about kind of what kind of things do we want, almost like a time capsule of 2020. What do we want to kind of remember or put in this or commemorate? And I, since I am a historian, and I did kind of figure I was teaching certain histories where I was like, well, since we're going through a pandemic, maybe I should teach a little bit more about pandemics throughout history and plagues throughout history and do a little bit more of that. And so when this show came up, I was kind of thinking about what I wanted to do. And I'd been reading more on the dance macabre and the Black Death in the medieval period. And this kind of idea of, it's a plague, and, it's also this kind of joyful dance, and death is kind of bringing everyone together and kind of this equalizer here. And I was just like, well, this kind of covers, similar things, what we're living through right now. And it's a historical event, poem and artwork. And so I'm kind of doing a artistic visual representation of the dance macabre. So I'm currently working on we've done a little bit on the choreography for that this week, and I'm going to kind of finalize that next week. So I'm pretty excited about it. I think I think it should be good.
You mentioned death there. I think you mentioned joy or something, bringing people together. So how do you feel about death at this point?
I mean, it's still, it is, I wouldn't go, definitely like in the kind of historical poem, it's all about, it's kind of this equalizer between the social classes and all that. And, it is still really hard for me to really kind of be that accepting of it. Like, I know that it happens, but it's still kind of, I still don't want to think about it. And it's still, just too painful because I have gone through it. And so even though I know, like, I'm going to go through it again and again and again. And, I've gone through it, with numerous pets and stuff before this, but it's just the amount of pain that it brings is really hard to kind of see that sort of joy in it, and, or the celebration. And I know, like, there are cultures that do more of the like joyful celebrations at funerals or memorials. And, on the one hand, I love that. And on the other hand, I'm like, I don't know how much I could actually do that. And maybe now I could, but I don't, I don't know. Actually, even now, I don't know that I could actually do like a super joyful thing for my mom without completely breaking down.
Yeah.
And I would love to do it, but I feel like I almost, in doing this artistic piece, it's almost a little bit removed, okay, this is a way to experience that aspect, but not make it's almost not fully personal. Cause I think it would still be just really too painful to try to do that on a personal level.
Well, just my observation from having met you an hour ago, I see joy coming through you. I've heard you describe the growth you've gone through over the last 7 years. I see you working on this documentary. You're doing great work by putting that out there for people. You're doing this podcast. You're helping people. I see you taking this thing that happened to your mother and going through this process and saying, I want to help other people go through this process. And that's, so you went from working on yourself, working on your body and working with your knitting and creating things to now actually going out and helping other people. And I think that is a process that we can go through with grief. And I call that like the final stage, where you get to the point where you're like, okay, I've worked on myself. I'm not healed. We're never fully healed. We're always going to miss our loved ones. You're going to get a tear in your eye when you think about your mother, but you also smiled a lot of times when you mentioned your mother. But that step when you can say, I can turn from how do I take care of myself to how do I take care of others? I think that's the final stage of saying that this grief thing that I've gone through has brought something good about. And I hope you can see that.
Yeah. And I think, it is very, very hard to kind of process that like this horrible thing happened and it's terrible. And I've also done something good with it. And it is, I think it's easier now to kind of mentally conceptualize that, because definitely earlier, it was like, no, nothing good can ever happen from this. Like nothing good will ever come out of this. And I think it's that balance of saying, you didn't need this to happen to do something good, but you were able to make something good. And I think that's the difference, is that sometimes, people look at it or they might say, oh, you needed this to move forward. And it's like, no, I didn't need it to move forward, but I definitely used it in a way to help other people. And, that again helps me. So.
Yeah. And I think that's another really good point, because we can look at it either way, and it's choice. I happen to believe everything in our life is planned, and that we plan it ourselves. Actually, that's the way I look at it, and that helps me to find meaning and purpose in things. But if you don't choose to look at it that way, the event happened either way. Your mother passed, my daughter passed. It's already happened. So what am I going to do with it? And that's the question that we all have to face, no matter what our beliefs are about why it happened, or if it had to happen. It did happen, and what do we do with it? And you're a shining example of going through the process and finding your own path. Because no one can tell us how to do it. No one can say, okay, well, walk 5 miles a day and then you'll be okay in a year. It's like, for you it was weightlifting. For me, that wouldn't probably work for me.
Right.
So, I really appreciate you sharing your story and promoting the project Speaking Grief at speakinggrief.org. And I want to encourage people to look that up, because it sounds like a wonderful resource for people, and to tell people, find your own way. And maybe it's lifting weights. Maybe try that if something else is working for
right.
you.
Yeah. If you've tried other, and I think that's the best thing is just keep trying stuff, because eventually, and again, with me, I mean, it took years to find, it took like 4 years to actually find something that worked.
Yeah.
But I think, and even, when I was, really in the deep of it, and just really, in the worst stage mentally, you still, I think as people, we still kind of want to do something or to try something. And I think, that's the best thing, is just keep trying, and it's perfectly okay if something doesn't work. And I think, like, we can't beat ourselves, say, hey, I tried this and it did not work for me. And that's okay. It's nothing I need to feel guilty about. It's, and then as, supporters, it's, we shouldn't make people feel guilty about that, or, oh, you should try this. Yeah, I tried that and it didn't work. Oh no, but did you try it like this? Or and it's like, accept that they tried it, and, make a new suggestion.
Yeah. Well, as you said, it reminded me of, I promote meditation a lot, and I was talking to another teacher, and she'd meditated for years, and she's like, I'm done with meditation. And she's like, I'm not promoting it more. So we had a really nice conversation about whether people should meditate or not. And it's not for everybody the way that I do it, but we came to an agreement that mindfulness is important, but we don't actually necessarily have to do a formal meditation. So yeah, we're all human beings, are all unique. Every relationship is different. Everything that we need is different. But what I get from you is like the human spirit is just amazing. And what I would encourage people that are still going through those early phases is to have faith in yourself that you'll get through it and things will get better. Because I know at the very beginning, it feels like it's never going to happen.
Yeah. I think that's so true. You feel like it's not going to happen. And if somebody tells you, oh, it'll get better, you're just like, no, it won't. And that's okay to be there, and eventually, kind of as you slowly, work towards different things, or try new things, all of a sudden you find, oh yeah, it is feeling a little bit better, and I feel a little bit better, and that doesn't diminish. And I think there was a point where it was just like, oh, is it diminishing my mom or my love for her or my memory of her.
Mm-hmm.
And you do go through that,
Mm-hmm.
and and eventually you get to a point where, oh no, it's not, it's still sad, and there's still a lot of pain there, but it doesn't diminish any of the good things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been a pleasure meeting you, Z, and having this conversation with you. I appreciate you doing this and putting yourself out there to help other people with the project and with doing the promotion, doing the podcast here today. And I wish you luck with your dance routine. I'm sure it's going to be great.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you for having me on here. I do appreciate having the opportunity to share this a little bit more with people.
All right. Well, you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, you too.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode. I want to make it really easy for you to reach me. So just send me a text to 31996 and simply text the word growth, GROWTH. In fact, you can right now just say, "Hey Siri," send a message to 31996. And when Siri asks you what you want to send, just say growth. You can do the same thing with OK Google. Thanks a lot. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks for listening to Grief to Growth. Brian hopes that you find this episode helpful and will come back for future episodes. Brian's best-selling book, Grief to Growth, Planted Not Buried, is a great resource for anyone who is coping with grief or knows someone who is. If you enjoy the podcast and would like to support it, there are 3 things you can do to help. The first is to share the podcast with someone that you think it will help. The second is to go to iTunes, rate, and review the episode. The third way you can support the podcast is by becoming a patron. Head over to www.patreon.com/grief2growth. That's patreon.com/grief, the number 2, growth, and sign up to make a small monthly donation. Patrons get access to exclusive bonus content and knowledge that you are helping to spread the message of grief to growth. For more about Brian and Grief to Growth, visit www.grief2growth.com.
Hi there. I hope you enjoyed this latest episode of the podcast, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. What questions came up for you? What did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? I invite you to visit us at grieftogrowth.circle.so. That's growth2growth.circle.so to continue the conversation with me and with other listeners. It's a space to sound off, to share reactions, and to go deeper into the topics from the show. I look forward to chatting more, and I hope to see you there.